Hi, I'm Nadi Hanna, and I am so excited that you're interested in learning about sacred geometry and drawing it because sacred geometry can change your life. This is the introductory module, and I'm going to talk for about 15 or 20 minutes and tell you a little bit about what makes sacred geometry so cool. And it's a little bit silly to do an introductory course because this subject is so vast you could study for lifetimes and not even get to half of it because it's just infinitely fascinating. But we're going to try. It's worth it because the geometry contains information for our entire system to be in harmony and complete. It has useful information for your energy systems, your emotional systems, your physical body, your intellect, your psychic abilities. It speaks to every level of our existence. It's part of why I'm so passionate about it. And briefly, before I get into some of the information, I want to say congratulations on having signed up for this class because what that means is that some part of you is open to expansion and learning more, not only just in the book's sense, but also for your well being. Because some inherently intelligent part of you is responding to the inherent intelligence in sacred geometry that transcends our limited understanding on this third dimensional realm. And if you stick with the series, you'll start to understand more and more what I mean by that, but we do build on the classes. It's fairly esoteric information. So this module is the intro information. And then the next module, we will be drawing the seed of life and the sunflower, which is the 2D version of our 3D toroidal field, which is our electromagnetic field and frequency. But we're going to start with the meat and bones, and let me get into that right now. So I've got a little PowerPoint here for you. So when I refer to the information as esoteric, it's because we're starting to talk about a reality that is based in energy, frequency, and vibration, right? These are the invisible realms of this world, but it's more real than what we've considered to be real thus far. So it is a shift in perspective to understand that our material world is made up of energy, frequency, and vibration. A frequency can be expressed as numbers, and then numbers can be perceived and organized as forms and patterns and geometry. So geometry is the closest translation point we have from the invisible to the visible, right? Geometry is where metaphysics meets physics. And it's really the best mechanism for understanding the material world because it translates in all realities and all dimensions. We'll get to dimensions in a minute. So I want to share with you a tiny 2-minute clip of Patch. And Patch is the main subject of the YouTube series Spirit Science. It's been around for a little while now. I highly recommend you go and look into it because they make very, very digestible and user-friendly vignettes about so many esoteric subjects and non-consensus reality topics, namely, astral travel, chakras, the metaphysical realms, ancient histories, advanced civilizations, all of the complex material that you'd like to have broken down in a very simple explanation. Spirit Science can do it. So this is Patch. He's going to talk for just a little over a minute and tell you why it's so important to draw sacred geometry.
Everything in the universe is geometric, whether it's people, trees, cats, planets, solar systems, stars, you name it. Anything in the universe can be measured on a geometric scale. Having said that, it's important to note that creation is also geometric. What we're going to be looking at today is the pattern of creation. Essentially, what this means is that everything in the universe comes out of this single pattern. I'm not making this up. This single image will change everything. When I mentioned in Lesson 5 that the ancient Egyptians and even more ancient civilizations knew about a deeper basic understanding of the universe, this is the flower of life, and it is also the creation pattern of everything in existence. Even non-tangible things, emotions, thoughts, music in its entire spectrum, everything comes from this image. Okay, so there are 13 information systems that comes out of the flower of life. Today, I'm going to show you how physical reality can manifest itself, which is just one of the 13 systems. In future lessons, we will look at more. It's also important to note that at first it may not make sense. I ask that you do not choose immediately to shut this out, and just watch with an open mind, and try and see this in a new way. Also, I want to tell you that by learning about sacred geometry simply by observing, you are absorbing only a very minuscule amount of information. If you really want to learn more, you must begin to draw it yourself. I kid you not, when you do this, you begin to see things in a new way. You begin to understand why things are done in the way that they are done. Promise.
Really quickly, Patch has inspired me. So there's a couple of aspects to sacred geometry that are really noteworthy. And one of them is the real-time live interaction and exchange between you and the geometry. Your process of drawing, your energy is involved in that moment-to-moment reflective process. And it's invaluable and it's transformational. So it's really true. It really matters when you start drawing it. Just wanted to add that. So I invite you to suspend judgment and see if you can just have a curiosity about the information and then decide if you'd like to go further or if you're satisfied with the blue pill. So back to the slideshow. Thank you, Patch. So part of what I like to do in these classes is to remind us of everything that we know, essentially, to remind us of the patterns that we see every day, to call into our attention the understanding that there are these broad spectrum shapes that we see completely unconsciously. We don't even register how much the geometry is in our world. And so the invitation from these classes is to bring your awareness to how much geometry is influencing us, because it is so powerful, because it runs in our subconscious. It has the ability to manipulate and influence our reality. It's happening all over the place. And the more you bring your attention to it, the more you are empowering yourself in your reality. So we're going to go over 3 of the fundamental patterns, but is by no means the only patterns. These are just the 3 main archetypes of the blueprints of our reality. We're going to look at the phi spiral, which exists everywhere on both galactic scale and minuscule scale, and we'll see in a moment even more minute scale. We're going to look at the phi spiral and the pentagon and the hexagon, and these are the fundamental building blocks. So the phi is in both the visible world on those grand scales as well as the invisible world. We are the phi ratio. We are this beautiful harmonic ratio that you find everywhere in nature. It is the fundamental pattern of how space divides itself. And it divides itself on both an infinitely large scale as well as an infinitely small scale. So we are built of this geometry. This is the golden mean ratio. It is the phi spiral, and it is partnered by the Fibonacci sequence, which is the rectangular and square boxes that you see. There is a mathematical equation, and it is the only equation anywhere that requires only 2 integers, and it either adds or subtracts from itself. So it's the only equation that does not need a 3rd integer, and as a result, it is this perfect direct relationship with itself. It is this harmony that creates this beautiful partnership of the flowing divine feminine and the structured divine masculine. So much interrelationship and harmony and beauty. And it's an incredible mathematical formula in that it perfectly builds on itself, where the first 2 segments combine to make the 3rd segment. So you have 1 and 2 is 3, and 2 and 3 is 5, and 3 and 5 is 8, and 5 and 8 is 13, on and on and on to infinity. It will never end. And this shape, some of the others, but this shape in particular, starts to hint at a level of intelligent design that cannot be ignored. So this is the equation written out, right? 1 and 1 is 2, 1 and 2 is 3, 2 and 3 and 5, on and on and on. And you can just repeat the pattern again and again. It will be the first 2 integers that adds up to be the 3rd. Now, here's a little bit of magic. So we can read this across from left to right. You can also read the equation on the left column from top to bottom. 1 and 1 is 2, 2 and 3 is 5, 3 and 5 is 8, and downward. The middle column as well. 1 and 2 is 3, 2 and 3 is 5, 3 and 5 is 8, and downward, and downward. And the third column as well. 2 and 3 is 5, 3 and 5 is 8, 8 and 13 is 21. Now come on, that is not only cool, that is really amazing. So if this doesn't strike you as really noteworthy, then I don't know what to say, because to me this is just a showstopper that suggests that there's way more going on with the geometry. And then you start to look at the fact that our entire body is built according to that ratio, from the tips of the fingers to the wrist, and then from the tips of the fingers to the elbow, to across the shoulder, our ears, our torso, down to our feet. It's all the phi ratio. And our DNA is this phi ratio. And I just invite you to begin to conceptualize that there is geometry in our entire body, everywhere. This is the double helix. We normally see it looking on a broadside view. But this on the right is the double helix if you were looking down the spiral, right? And this creates its own tensile geometry and a little bit of a Rorschach test to see what you can see in there. But starting to make the connections of how much the geometry is part of our life. Typically, when you have iconic pieces of art and architecture and culturally significant and iconic imagery, it is because it incorporates the phi ratio. It is because it has this harmonic proportion. And it has a sense of resonance with us because we are the geometry. And as I said, the invitation is to begin to notice, because when you notice, when you start noticing the geometry, the implications are really large, because if everything is geometry, then where's the separation? We are all geometric patterns. Our brains are formed on a geometric pattern that starts in the cell divisions and grows into these, the DNA is programmed to grow into these harmonic patterns. And look at that, the pineal gland, right, happens to be at the center of the phi spiral of the shape of the brain. What about that? Curious at least. The phi is then related to the pentagon and the pentagram, as you can see here. So the mathematic ratio of phi is one segment of 1 to another segment of 1.618. So it's not necessarily 1 to 2, it's 1 to 1.618. And you can see that here in the length of this arm of the pentagram. Here's the segment of 1, and this red is the 1.618. So here you have this direct mathematic ratio relationship to the phi, which is the 1 to 1.618. So all of the shapes are related to each other in that they actually have fundamentally the phi ratio as part of their fundamental pattern. And there is so much math in these shapes. It's humbling, especially to me, because I do not specialize in the mathematic aspects of sacred geometry. However, if it does float your boat to study mathematics, I highly recommend exploring the golden mean, the golden ratio, phi, and the significance of the math in all of these shapes. It is endlessly satisfying if you are into math, and I am not. I am much more into the metaphysical and esoteric aspects of the geometry, but they are related. It wouldn't be so satisfying if you didn't have the harmonics that could be explained by the numbers and the equations, right? So it's a partnership. We got to have all of it in the mix, and that's part of what makes sacred geometry so sacred, is that it encompasses everything. It's this beautiful relationship within itself to everything. It's woven into the very fabric of our lives. And again, starting to notice how the external world has geometry everywhere. We just take it for granted. We don't register what's happening. And the more we start to register what's happening, then the more we are bringing our awareness to how our consciousness is influenced by the geometry. And why is that important? First of all, it can connect you more to the natural world, right? You can start to understand the rhythms and how we are interdependent and interrelated. And you can also develop a greater awareness of how the man made world is influencing our consciousness. And this is a very useful and empowering subject to study. I will get into that subject a lot more further down the course. Needless to say, symbols and geometry are used everywhere to influence us. Part of the reason this information has been kept from mainstream consciousness is because of how powerful it is. And in the classes, I do not go into why and how it's been used against the human psyche. I do go into why it's so important to start to use it for your psychological well-being. Needless to say, if it's that powerful, it can be used for the good or the bad. So let's start to use it for our consciousness and our expansion, because it's so user-friendly and accessible. It's everywhere. You don't have to go looking hard for it. It's in our molecular structure. It's in our silicon. It's in our crystalline structure. It's everywhere. So you can just start working with it right now. You could put me on pause and look around and find geometric patterns in the thing sitting right next to you, in your pen, your pencil. But the entire known universe knows about the extraordinary genius of the hexagon. It is the most efficient way of packing information. So here you have NASA's James Webb Space Telescope using the hexagonal pattern to maximize on the information it can send and receive. We're talking about our planet, but it should be said that these geometric patterns are throughout the universe, right? So this is a hexagon on the North Pole of Saturn. And staying out in the universal intelligence subject matter, you will see throughout this Sacred Geometry series that I incorporate crop circles into the conversation. Because when we're talking about sacred geometry, we are talking about an intelligence that is beyond 3D human consciousness. This is an intelligence that has been given to us. We have only begun to scratch the surface of what the geometry holds for us and our evolutionary process. And it is noteworthy that so many of the crop circles are based in geometry. You can see all of these crop circles have the hexagonal six-sided geometry. And that is obviously a huge line of study in and of itself. I do have other classes where I talk about that a lot because it's incredible technology for the advancement of our consciousness. So getting into the actual sacred geometry, the universal symbols that are found everywhere in the universe, but everywhere on our planet. So this is the seed of life. You have this six-sided geometry, and we'll look a little bit into how it becomes the seed of life, how 7 circles can morph into that beautiful harmonic pattern. And that the seed of life then expands to repeat its pattern and turn into the flower of life. And you heard Pat earlier talk about how this symbol contains basically the coordinates and the intelligence for all of our material world. So one of the things that is unique about sacred geometry is that almost every culture will have some reference to this pattern, and it will refer to it in a flower essence. Typically, you will see it in direct relationship to sacred sites or the Forbidden City, for example, in Beijing. The 2 Fu dogs that typically guard temples and palaces. One Fu dog has a child underneath its paw, and the other Fu dog has typically a 3-dimensional shape of the flower of life. And that starts to get a little curious, doesn't it? Because this shape shows up everywhere, and particularly in holy and sacred locations around the planet. Like, what is that? What is that? I mean, stop and think about that for a minute. You've got India, Turkey, Beijing, Egypt. This symbol shows up representing holy places. And here again, you see it everywhere in sacred sites and temples and holy places. In symbology, in cultural reference, you can begin to notice these similarities, notice where these geometries and how these geometries are used. Typically, they evoke reverence or subversion or association with deities and religions, and our psyches respond to symbolic manipulation. And that word being neutral, we understand the world through symbols and archetypes. Now, this slide is a fascinating example of what I'm talking about when I say this is information from elsewhere. This is not generated by our tiny little third dimensional egoic conscious minds. This is the Osirian temple in Abydos, Egypt, and this is a temple with no hieroglyphs, with the exception of these 3 images of the flower of life. These images were holographically burned into the atomic structure of the rock. Whatever technology made these shapes, they altered the crystalline structure of the granite. And that is the technology that we are not using at this time. We certainly weren't back then. So the invitation is to start to say, what is going on here? This is more than meets the eye. This is beyond our awareness. This is beyond our daily mundane explanation for reality. This is big stuff. Sacred geometry is you, it's me, it's us, and it's everything. There isn't anything that doesn't have geometry. We are fundamentally geometry. I sound like such an emphatic person. But look at this. This says it all. You've got the first cell division replicated in the creation of the seed of life geometry. So I am so passionate about this for this reason. We are the geometry. And when you start to go from this 2D geometric pattern, realizing that it's really representative of the 3D reality and geometry and the material world, then when you immerse yourself into this fully, you start to understand that it's not just 3D, it's multi-D. This is a multi-dimensional reality that we live in. So you can take drawing 7 little circles that are replicating the cell division in the first moments of our biological life, and you can extrapolate to everything in the known universe. So that's the nutshell. I'm going to take a nice deep breath because that was a ton of information. Whew, little whirlwind tour there. And I'm going to show you what we're going to be drawing in the next module. So this is the seed of life. We will also be building on that and drawing the sunflower, which is also known as our toroidal field. And what that means is that this 2-dimensional shape that we can draw very easily is actually representative of a 3rd-dimensional toroidal field, right? This is our electromagnetic field. This is energy coming out our system and coming back into our system. And everything in our known universe has an electromagnetic field. This is drawing 2D geometry where you are accessing the consciousness of our electromagnetic field. So you are building depth and breadth and dimension to your awareness when you're drawing this geometry. You are actually drawing energetics. And we will take the sunflower into the next expression, which is the 12-fold geometry called the dodecagon, right? So we're going to see how you've got this beautiful circular divine feminine flowing shape into the divine masculine structured linear form, and we'll see the partnership of those two and how they come together to form one balanced geometry and represent the divine masculine and divine feminine that's in all of us, and that sense of harmony, that sense of well-being. This is what sacred geometry offers us, is access to that coherence, access to that inner state of balance. And it is profound. And I hope that you join me on the drawing module so that we can go a little bit deeper into this experience and have that process of balance come to life. Thank you so much. Hope to see you soon.